17,000 islands, 300 languages, one of the largest populations on Earth, and yet, most people couldn't point to it on a map. This is Indonesia, a place where ancient ruins, jungles, volcanoes, and modern megacities collide, and its journey to global fame is nothing short of unbelievable. Era 1: The origins of Indonesia. Before Indonesia became one of the world's most talked about emerging nations. Its story began millions of years ago, long before borders, governments, or even kingdoms existed. This vast archipelago was shaped by fire. Volcanoes rose from the ocean floor, creating islands that would one day become home to one of humanity's oldest civilizations. Around 1.8 million years ago, early humans known today as Java man walked these lands. They hunted, created tools from volcanic stone, and adapted to an environment that was both beautiful and unforgiving. These early inhabitants left behind clues of their existence, traces that show Indonesia has been part of the human journey since the beginning. As time flowed forward, scattered tribes grew into organized communities. They learned to sail across short distances between islands, beginning a long tradition of maritime culture. With the sea as their highway, people moved, traded, and shared new ideas. Eventually, these communities evolved into powerful kingdoms that shaped Southeast Asian history. Among the earliest and most influential was the Srivijaya Empire, a maritime powerhouse that dominated regional trade for centuries. From here, spices, gold, and rare goods flowed across oceans, attracting merchants and travelers from India, China, and Arabia. Later, another remarkable kingdom rose, the Majapahit Empire. It unified vast territories and became one of the greatest powers the region had ever seen. These kingdoms established Indonesia as a center of culture, trade, and innovation long before the idea of a modern nation existed. For thousands of years, this region was not a single country, but a collection of diverse ethnic groups, beliefs, and traditions. Yet, through all their differences, they shared one defining trait: a deep connection to the sea and to the islands they called home. Era by era, these early foundations built the identity of what would one day become Indonesia. But soon, powerful outsiders would arrive. Drawn by the most valuable treasures these islands produced, spices the world was willing to fight for, and their arrival would change Indonesia forever. Era to the arrival of Europeans and the spice wars for centuries. The islands of Indonesia thrived on their own terms, ruled by local kings, connected through trade, and rich with natural treasures. But among all these treasures, one stood above the rest: spices. Cloves, nutmeg, and mace grew here and almost nowhere else on Earth. To the world beyond Asia, these spices were worth more than gold. As news of these exotic islands spread, foreign empires took notice. In the early 16th century, the first Europeans arrived, led by the Portuguese. They came seeking wealth, influence, and control over the spice trade. But they were not alone for long. Soon, the Spanish, the Dutch, and the English sailed into the region. Each wanted a share of the riches. What followed was not peaceful trade, but a brutal competition for dominance. This era would later be known as the Spice Wars. The Dutch, through their powerful trading company the VOC, became the most aggressive force. They established strongholds, imposed strict rules, and used military power to control the flow of spices. Local kingdoms that once managed their own trade suddenly found themselves forced into unfair treaties or violent conflict. Across the islands, resistance grew. Some communities fought fiercely to protect their land and livelihood. Others were overwhelmed by superior European weapons, strategy, and alliances. Families were displaced, leaders were imprisoned or killed, and entire regions were reshaped under colonial ambition. The arrival of the Europeans marked a turning point. What began as trade quickly transformed into domination. Indonesia's rich resources became tools of foreign profit, and its people were caught in the struggle of empires competing half a world away. Yet even in this era of exploitation, the foundations of modern Indonesia were forming. New ideas arrived, new political structures took shape, and a shared sense of struggle began to unite people from different islands. The seeds of independence were planted long before the word Indonesia even existed. But the fight for control was far from over. As colonial power grew stronger, so did the desire for freedom, a desire that would ignite the next era of Indonesia's story. Era 3: The Dutch colonial age and the rise of resistance. As the Spice Wars ended, one power stood victorious: the Dutch. By the 17th century, their influence spread across the archipelago, transforming Indonesia into the heart of their colonial empire. What began as trade had now become total control. The Dutch East India Company, known as the VOC, ruled with a business mindset, but their methods were far from civilized. Local farmers were forced to grow crops chosen by the Dutch: coffee, sugar, indigo, and of course spices. Lands were seized, traditional leaders lost authority, and entire communities were pushed into a cycle of exploitation. When the VOC collapsed in the late 1700s, the Dutch state stepped in directly. This marked the beginning of the cultivation system, a policy that forced Indonesian farmers to give up a portion of their land and labor to grow cash crops for export. While the Netherlands grew wealthy, millions of Indonesians suffered hunger, poverty, and oppression. But colonial power never went unchallenged. Across the islands, resistance movements began to rise. There were local rebellions, some lasting months, others lasting years. Heroes emerged from different regions. Prince Diponegoro in Java, Imam Bonjol in Sumatra, Patimura in Maluku. Their courage inspired generations to come. Even though many of these uprisings were suppressed, they planted something the Dutch could not destroy: a shared belief that the people of the archipelago had the right to govern themselves. For the first time, the idea of a united identity as something larger than individual kingdoms began to grow. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the world changed. Education spread, newspapers circulated, and new political ideas reached the islands. A young, educated class emerged, questioning colonial rule. They formed organizations, wrote essays, held meetings, and dreamed of freedom. It was during this era that the word Indonesia first appeared as a concept, a name for the diverse peoples united under foreign rule. Students, activists, and future leaders began shaping the early blueprint of a nation that did not yet exist, but was slowly coming to life in their minds. The Dutch tried to maintain power with strict laws, arrests, and censorship, but they could not stop the growing fire of nationalism. Every injustice, every forced labor system, every act of brutality only strengthened the desire for independence. Indonesia was changing. The colonial system, once unshakable, was beginning to crack, and soon, a global event far beyond the Dutch or Indonesian shores would reshape everything, setting the stage for the next chapter in the struggle for freedom. Era 4. World War II and the Japanese occupation. As the early 20th century unfolded, Indonesian nationalism continued to grow quietly but powerfully, yet no one could foresee the event that would shake the foundations of colonial rule. The outbreak of World War II in 1942. The Japanese military swept across Southeast Asia with astonishing speed. For more than 3 centuries, the Dutch had held Indonesia firmly under their control. But in just a matter of months, that control collapsed. The Netherlands, weakened by war in Europe, could not defend its distant colony. Indonesia fell under Japanese occupation. At first, many Indonesians believed Japan's arrival might bring liberation. The Japanese presented themselves as Asia for Asians, promising an end to Western rule. For a moment, hope flickered, but reality soon followed. The occupation brought strict military control, forced labor, food shortages, and suffering for millions. Villages were uprooted, young men were taken to work for the Japanese war effort, and strict censorship silenced the people. Yet even in this harsh environment, something crucial began to change. For the first time in modern history, Indonesians were allowed and sometimes encouraged to organize, to train, and to develop leadership skills. Japan needed local cooperation, and in doing so, they unintentionally strengthened the very nationalist movement they wished to control. Key Indonesian figures such as Sukarno and Muhammad Hatta were permitted to speak publicly, mobilize groups, and influence the population. Japanese programs trained young Indonesians in military discipline, political organization, and administration skills that would soon prove essential. As the war dragged on, Japan's power weakened. By 1945, their defeat was inevitable. Sensing the opportunity, Indonesian nationalists prepared for the moment they had dreamed of for generations: the chance to declare independence. When Japan finally surrendered in August 1945, a sudden power vacuum spread across the archipelago. The Dutch were gone. Japan had fallen. For the first time in centuries, Indonesia stood at a crossroads, unruled, uncertain, but ready. Everything the people had endured, centuries of colonialism, years of resistance, and the harsh Japanese occupation had created a single, powerful truth: the desire for freedom could no longer be contained. And within days, Indonesia would take the boldest step in its history, entering a new era that would define the nation forever. Era 5. The proclamation of independence. With Japan's surrender in August 1945, Indonesia entered a moment unlike any other in its long history. For the first time in centuries, there was no colonial ruler, no foreign army making decisions, and no clear authority and power. The archipelago stood in a fragile silence, uncertain, yet full of possibility. Indonesian nationalists understood the urgency of this moment. They knew that if the Dutch returned before an independent government was declared, the dream of freedom might vanish again. Two of the nation's most influential figures, Sukarno and Muhammad Hatta, stepped into this critical vacuum. On the morning of August 17, 1945, at a modest house in Jakarta, surrounded by a small but determined crowd, Sukarno prepared to read a declaration that would change the course of history. The world was still reeling from war, but here, in this moment, Indonesians gathered with a single hope: freedom. With calm determination, Sukarno spoke the words that had lived in the hearts of millions for generations. "We, the people of Indonesia, hereby declare the independence of Indonesia." It was a simple sentence, but it carried the weight of centuries of struggle. Hatta stood beside him, representing unity, resolve, and the vision of a future nation. Together they became the voice of a people who had endured colonization, forced labor, oppression, and war, yet refused to surrender their identity. News of the proclamation spread across the islands with astonishing speed. From Java to Sumatra, from Sulawesi to Bali, people celebrated, cried, prayed, and embraced one another. For the first time, they were not Javanese or Bolognese or Bugis or Minangkabau. They were Indonesians. But independence was not simply declared. It needed to be defended. The Dutch refused to accept the proclamation and prepared to return. The British intervened. Chaos, conflict, and diplomatic battles awaited the newborn nation. Still, the proclamation marked a point of no return. Indonesia had spoken its truth to the world. A new country had been born, not from the decisions of foreign powers, but from the courage of its people. This was the beginning of the Republic of Indonesia, a nation built on unity, sacrifice, and the unstoppable belief that freedom belonged to them. The Revolutionary War, 1945 to 1949, Indonesia had declared its independence, but the world did not immediately accept it. For the Dutch, the loss of their richest colony was unthinkable. And so, within months of the proclamation, they returned determined to reclaim control over the archipelago. What followed was not simply political disagreement, it was a full-scale struggle for survival. A young, untested nation faced a powerful colonial empire with far more weapons, resources, and international connections. From 1945 to 1949, Indonesia entered a period known as the Revolutionary War, a time marked by battles, diplomacy, sacrifice, and unwavering determination. The fight begins across the islands. Ordinary people took up arms. Farmers, students, workers, former soldiers all united under the goal of protecting the independence they had just claimed. With limited weapons and improvised strategies, they faced a well-organized Dutch military force. The Dutch called their offensives police actions, but Indonesians knew them for what they were: attempts to crush the new republic. The struggle for international recognition while battles raged on the ground. Another war was unfolding, a diplomatic one. Indonesian leaders traveled, negotiated, and spoke to a world still exhausted from the Second World War. They appealed to international organizations, foreign governments, and global public opinion. Slowly, the world began to see Indonesia not as a rebellious colony, but as a nation fighting for its rightful freedom. Capture of leaders and the unbroken spirit. In 1948, the Dutch arrested Sukarno-Hatta and other key leaders, hoping to break the movement. But instead of collapsing, Indonesia grew stronger. Local commanders continued resistance, guerrilla fighters regrouped, and the people refused to accept defeat. The arrest only confirmed one thing: the Indonesian struggle was bigger than any single leader. It was a national awakening. Turning point: by 1949, global pressure mounted. The United States, the United Nations, and many newly independent nations pushed the Dutch to negotiate. They could no longer justify occupying a country that had clearly chosen its own destiny. Victory of the Republic. On December 27, 1949, after 4 years of conflict and countless sacrifices, the Netherlands formally recognized Indonesia's sovereignty. The war for independence was finally over. This victory did not come through wealth or advanced weapons. It came through unity, persistence, and the belief that freedom was worth any price. With the signing of sovereignty, Indonesia entered a new chapter. A chapter full of hope but also enormous challenges. A vast, diverse archipelago had finally become a single nation. Now came the task of building it. Building a new nation. 1950s, 1960s, Indonesia had won its independence, but victory in war was only the beginning. The far greater challenge lay ahead: transforming a scattered archipelago of more than 17,000 islands into a functioning united nation. In 1950, Indonesia officially became a parliamentary democracy. The hopes were high, but the reality was complex. The country inherited deep social inequality, economic instability, and vast differences in culture, language, and political vision. A country of many voices with over 300 ethnic groups, countless local traditions, and islands separated by oceans. Unity was not guaranteed. Different regions had different dreams for the future. Some wanted stronger central power, others demanded autonomy. This diversity became Indonesia's strengths, but also its early struggle. Economic challenges: the Dutch had left behind damaged infrastructure, weak industry, and an economy that depended heavily on raw materials. The new government faced shortages of food, money, and skilled workers. The world expected Indonesia to fail to break apart under pressure. But Indonesians had already proven something far more powerful than resources: their ability to endure and rebuild. The rise of Sukarno's guided democracy. By the late 1950s, political instability grew. Coalition governments collapsed one after another. Rebellions erupted in several regions. testing the unity of the young republic. In response to the chaos, President Sukarno introduced a new system called guided democracy. Instead of competing parties, he envisioned a political structure centered on unity, nationalism, and balance between major forces: the military, religious groups, and the Communist Party. This system stabilized the government, but it also concentrated power. Sukarno became the symbolic father of the nation, leading with passionate speeches, bold ideals, and a vision of Indonesia as a global force. Foreign pressure and global tensions, the Cold War added new complications. The United States, the Soviet Union, and China all sought influence in Southeast Asia. Indonesia, strategically located and newly independent, found itself caught between global powers. Sukarno tried to keep Indonesia neutral, but the political climate grew increasingly polarized. The military and communist groups both sought greater influence, setting the stage for tension that would erupt in the years to come. The dream of unity. Despite the challenges, the early decades of independence laid the foundations of a national identity. Schools expanded. The Indonesian language spread as a unifying force. Institutions were built, infrastructure slowly improved, and the idea of a single Indonesian nation grew stronger in the hearts of millions. Indonesia had survived colonization and war, and now it survived the turbulence of its early years as a republic. But the next chapter would push the nation into one of the most dramatic and controversial periods in its history. As the 1960s unfolded, Indonesia stood at a crossroads, divided by ideology, pressured by global powers, and struggling to find its true political direction. The next era would see conflict, transformation, and the rise of a new leader who would reshape the nation for decades. Era 8. The 1965 turmoil and the rise of Suharto's new order. By the mid-1960s, Indonesia was a nation full of hope and tension. The economy struggled, political parties were locked in rivalry, and the Cold War's shadow hung heavily over Southeast Asia. Three powerful forces shaped Indonesian politics: the military, the Islamic groups, and the Indonesian Communist Party, known as the PKI, one of the largest communist movements in the world outside China and the Soviet Union. President Sukarno insisted these groups could coexist under his vision of guided democracy. But beneath the surface, conflict was building. International pressures, ideological battles, and economic hardship created a volatile environment waiting for a spark. The night of September 30th, 1965. That spark came on the night of September 30th, 1965. A violent and mysterious event took place. A group calling itself the 30th of September Movement kidnapped and killed several top army generals. The true origins and motives of the movement remain debated to this day, but its consequences were immediate. General Suharto, a rising military figure, quickly moved to restore control. He blamed the PKI for the violence and launched a massive counter-operation. What followed became one of the darkest chapters in Indonesia's history: nationwide violence. In the months that followed, anti-communist violence swept across the country. Hundreds of thousands were killed or imprisoned. Families were torn apart, entire communities were marked, and fear spread through the nation. The events of 1965 left a deep and lasting scar, one still discussed with caution and pain today. As chaos unfolded, Sukarno's authority weakened. Suharto, supported by the military, gradually took control of government functions, security forces, and political institutions. The fall of Sukarno in 1967, under mounting pressure, Sukarno's power was officially stripped. The man who had proclaimed independence, who had united the nation, and who had led Indonesia through its early years, was forced aside. With Sukarno removed, Suharto was appointed acting president and soon after, president of the Republic of Indonesia. This marked the beginning of a new era, the New Order. The New Order begins. Suharto promised stability, economic growth, and a return to order after years of turbulence. He realigned Indonesia with Western nations, opened the economy to investment, and placed strict limits on political freedom. The government centralized power, suppressed dissent, and closely controlled the media and education. Under Suharto, Indonesia entered a period of rapid development, but also one of tight political control. It was an era defined by both progress and limitation, prosperity for some, and silence for others. The events of 1965 reshaped Indonesia forever. They ended the era of Sukarno, lifted Suharto to power, and set the stage for more than 3 decades of the New Order regime. In the next chapter, Indonesia would chase economic transformation, but at the cost of political freedom. Era 9, the New Order, growth, control, and the 32-year rule of Suharto. With Suharto's rise to power, Indonesia entered a new chapter, one defined by stability, discipline, and a strong central authority. The era was called the New Order, and it would dominate Indonesian life for more than 3 decades. Promises of stability. Suharto came to power with a clear message. Indonesia needed order. The chaos of the past had shaken the nation, and people longed for calm. Under the New Order, the military played a major role in governing the country, ensuring loyalty, suppressing dissent, and maintaining a firm grip on society. The goal was simple: prevent the country from ever falling into ideological conflict again. Political parties were merged, activism was restricted, and the press operated under heavy supervision. Indonesia became stable but tightly controlled. The economic transformation for the first time in decades, Indonesia opened its doors to global investment. Foreign companies arrived, bringing capital, infrastructure projects, and jobs. Roads, ports, and power plants were built. Agricultural reforms improved rice production, helping Indonesia achieve food self-sufficiency. During the 1970s and 80s, the oil boom brought huge revenue. Indonesia's economy grew rapidly, cities expanded, and millions were lifted out of poverty. Jakarta became a rising Southeast Asian center, and Indonesia was recognized globally as a developing success story. Suharto promoted a vision he called developmentism, the belief that economic progress was the primary goal, even if it required strong political restrictions. The cost of control, but beneath the surface of progress, problems were growing. The political system allowed little opposition. Critics were silenced, newspapers were censored, and the military maintained significant influence at every level of government. Corruption also became deeply rooted. Businesses connected to Suharto's family and political allies amassed enormous wealth. For ordinary citizens, success often depended on connections rather than merit. Rising tensions in the 1990s. By the early 1990s, the cracks in the new order were becoming visible. Young Indonesians demanded more freedom. Human rights activists spoke out despite the risks. Regional inequality widened. Some islands flourished, others lagged far behind. Then came the Asian financial crisis of 1997. Indonesia's currency collapsed, prices soared, and unemployment surged. Millions fell back into poverty. The economic miracle that had sustained Suharto's rule was suddenly gone. The fall of Suharto, public anger exploded into protests led by students across the country. They demanded reform, transparency, and the end of Suharto's three-decade rule. Clashes occurred, tension escalated, and the country was on the brink of chaos. On May 21, 1998, after 32 years in power, Suharto announced his resignation. It marked the end of one of Asia's longest authoritarian regimes, and the dawn of a new, uncertain era for Indonesia. The new order had delivered economic development and national stability, but at a price: political freedom, fairness, and transparency. Its final collapse opened the door to a new Indonesia, one that would embrace democracy, face new challenges, and rediscover its identity in the 21st century. Era 10. Reformasi. The birth of a new democracy. 1998-2000s. The cries for reform. As the new order collapsed, people across the country demanded reformasi reform. Students, activists, workers, and religious groups united with a single message: Indonesia must never return to dictatorship. The goals were clear: end corruption, reduce military power, strengthen civil liberties, and create a government truly chosen by the people. Rebuilding the foundations. Indonesia began rewriting its political structure almost immediately. New laws were introduced to protect free speech and limit presidential power. The military stepped back from politics, ending decades of dominance in civilian life for the first time. Political parties could operate without fear. New newspapers emerged, new voices rose, and public debate became part of everyday life. Indonesians were learning, after decades of silence, how to speak freely again. Challenges of a new democracy, but freedom also brought friction. Without the iron grip of the new order, long-suppressed tensions resurfaced. Ethnic conflicts erupted in several regions. Political rivalries intensified. Economic recovery was slow, and millions continued to struggle. Some feared the country might break apart under the weight of its own diversity. A historic moment, the first direct election in 2004. Indonesia reached a milestone for the first time in its history. The people directly elected their president. Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, known as SBY, became the first leader chosen through a truly democratic vote. This moment signaled to the world that Indonesia's transition was real, stable, and irreversible. The rise of a global democracy. As the 2000s progressed, Indonesia strengthened its democratic institutions. New anti-corruption bodies tackled long-standing graft. Local governments gained more autonomy, empowering regions across the archipelago. Peace agreements were reached in conflict zones like USA, demonstrating political maturity and compromise. Indonesia, once predicted to collapse after Suharto's fall, was instead reinventing itself calmly, steadily, and confidently. The reformasi era transformed Indonesia from an authoritarian state into one of the world's largest and most vibrant democracies. It was a rebirth not just of the political system, but of the nation's spirit. The next chapter would see Indonesia rise even further, stepping onto the global stage with ambition and pride. Era 11. Indonesia's rise as a motor and power. 2010s-2020s. As the new century progressed, Indonesia was no longer just recovering, it was rising. A nation once defined by colonial struggle and political turbulence was now stepping confidently into the global spotlight. The world began paying attention. A growing economic force. By the 2010s, Indonesia's economy became one of the fastest growing in the region. With more than 270 million people, the fourth largest population in the world, Indonesia turned into a massive consumer market. Foreign investors saw opportunity. Startups blossomed, cities expanded into modern hubs filled with skyscrapers, universities, and new infrastructure. Jakarta, Surabaya, Bandung, these were no longer just Indonesian cities. They became centers of Southeast Asian innovation and business. The Jokowi-era infrastructure and transformation in 2014. Joko Widodo, popularly known as Jokowi, was elected president, a humble furniture maker turned governor. He became a symbol of a new generation of leadership, practical, approachable, and focused on results. Jokowi pushed a massive infrastructure revolution. New highways, ports, rail networks, airports, and dams. His vision was simple: connect the islands, unify the nation, and make Indonesia competitive on a global scale. Under his leadership, Indonesia launched mega projects like the Jakarta MRT, new toll roads across Java and Sumatra, and even announced the construction of a new capital city, Nusantara, a bold plan to reshape the future. Digital revolution and global recognition. As infrastructure grew, so did technology. Indonesia saw the rise of unicorn companies like Gojek, Tokopedia, Bukalapak, and Traveloka, startups that transformed daily life. Motorbike drivers became digital entrepreneurs, payments became cashless, and online marketplaces connected millions of small sellers to the digital world. Indonesia evolved from a developing nation into a crucial digital economy in Asia. The COVID-19 test. Then came 2020. The pandemic tested the strength of every nation, and Indonesia was no exception. Hospitals were overwhelmed, the economy slowed, and daily life changed overnight. But Indonesia pushed through with mass vaccinations, mobility adjustments, and community resilience. Despite the hardship, the country emerged more determined, more united, and more prepared for the future. Geopolitics and a new global role in the 2020s. Indonesia's strategic position made it a key player on the world stage. It chaired the G20 summit in 2022, hosting leaders from the most powerful nations. The world saw Indonesia not just as a large country, but as a mediator, a bridge between East and West, developed and developing nations. Its influence in ASEAN strengthened, its voice in climate diplomacy grew louder, and its economic partnerships expanded across Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and beyond. A cultural powerhouse, Indonesia's cultural identity also found global recognition, from Bali's tourism boom to Indonesian cuisine gaining worldwide popularity, to global musicians and athletes proudly representing the archipelago. Indonesia was no longer in the background. It was becoming a major cultural influence across the planet. By the 2020s, Indonesia had transformed into a rising power economically, culturally, and politically. From ancient kingdoms to colonial hardship, from independence struggles to democratic rebirth, Indonesia's journey was extraordinary. And now, standing strong in the 21st century, the nation was ready for its next chapter. Indonesia 2025. The future begins now. As 2025 arrives, Indonesia stands on the edge of its next great transformation. A nation once shaped by empires, colonization, revolution, and reform is now driven by ambition, a vision to become one of the world's leading powers. A nation preparing for its next chapter in 2025. Indonesia is no longer defined by the struggles of its past. It is defined by the possibilities of its future. Global analysts predict Indonesia will become one of the world's top economies within the coming decades. This is not a dream, it is a direction shaped by strategy, youth, and innovation. More than half of Indonesia's population is under 35, young, energetic, digitally connected, a generation that thinks globally and builds locally. They are the driving force behind Indonesia's next revolution. The new capital, Nusantara, a symbol of the future. One of the boldest steps toward 2025 is the creation of Indonesia's new capital, Nusantara. This city is more than a relocation, it is a statement to the world, a vision of sustainability, smart technology, and balanced development across the archipelago. Nusantara represents Indonesia's desire to compete with modern capitals while reducing the pressures on Jakarta. It is the physical symbol of a country ready to reinvent itself, an emerging leader in Southeast Asia regionally. Indonesia's influence continues to grow. As the largest economy in Southeast Asia, the country plays a critical role in shaping ASEAN's political, economic, and security landscape. Indonesia has become a bridge, a mediator between global powers, a voice for developing nations, and a champion of stability in a rapidly changing world. Technology, innovation, and the new economy. Indonesia's digital economy is one of the strongest in Asia. Startups evolve into global players. Fintech dominates daily transactions, and e-commerce connects even the most remote islands. Electric vehicles, renewable energy, and digital infrastructure form the backbone of Indonesia's new green and tech-driven economic vision. The country is no longer just following global trends, it is shaping them. Culture without borders. Indonesia's cultural influence continues to spread worldwide. Its music, films, fashion, and traditions attract international audiences. Tourism rebounds with strength, not only in Bali but across Java, Sumatra, Sulawesi, Kalimantan, and Papua, showcasing the beauty and diversity of the entire archipelago. The world doesn't just visit Indonesia, it admires it. The dream of 2045. As Indonesia approaches its 100th year of independence in 2045, It carries a national dream. To become a fully developed, globally influential nation, this dream is based on strength, not only in economy but in unity, resilience, and cultural pride. Indonesia's greatest power has always been its people, and their journey continues forward with determination. In 2025, Indonesia is not the same nation it was decades ago. It is stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever. From ancient kingdoms to modern skyscrapers, from colonial struggle to global leadership, Indonesia's story is one of unstoppable evolution. And as the world watches, the nation of 1,000 islands steps boldly into its future.